And my intention is to share with you these struggles in a very open way, and also to bring to you perspectives that I have stumbled across through my reading of Eastern wisdom traditions, Western psychology, Western philosophy, mystics like Osho, and all of that. So I want to welcome all of you to this Sunday webinar. And I know that it must have been a particularly challenging thing to tear yourself away from the Browns game. I hear that the Browns are winning and are doing exceptionally well. We hope that in the 30 minutes at the end of the seminar, they would have added further to their score, as you take this little vacation from the game. So thank you all for being here. It's Priceless Wisdom from my third divorce. I want to begin actually before I get into the nucleus of issues that constitute and come up in relationships, I want to make some general comments about the existential plight of man. One of the challenges that Osho brings up is that there appears to be a black hole in the very structure of human consciousness. What is he talking about? He's talking about the fact that man seems to be ill with a feverish search. It is almost like we approach life, not just in our relationships, but in every aspect of life with the fundamental formula, I am A, but I'm not happy being A, and I want to become B. And that seems to be a perennial source of discontent that leads us to keep searching. It also appears, says Osho, that we're not clear about what it is we are searching for. We know that there's a sense of emptiness, a sense of meaninglessness, perhaps a generalized sense of dissatisfaction. And no matter what we do, frustration seems to be the destiny. And the irony is that everybody is searching for something, and they're searching in a very feverish way, going from one thing to the other, but none of us seem to be clear about what it is that we are searching for. The rich are searching, the poor are searching, the wise are searching, the foolish are searching, the ill are searching, the healthy are searching. It's almost like everybody is searching. So one of the first existential realities that we have to come to terms with is that we are in the web of a constant sense of discontent. And we might seek to medicate the discontent through work. We may try to seek to medicate it through sports. We may try to medicate it through relationships. But unless we are willing to look inward at the source of the discontent, this untransformed consciousness is going to bring us to dissatisfaction and discontent at every step. Because notice, no matter how many times you've been divorced, what is the only thing that was common to all the divorces is the person themselves. And therefore, one of the first existential things we have to confront with ourselves is this search, that we are all searching for something, and we are in this feverish search, but we don't even know what it is that we are looking for. And you will find that even when we find the thing that we think we are looking for, it doesn't appear to produce an experience of contentment. Soon, whatever it is that we have attained seems to disappear into this black hole, and we feel empty and meaningless all over again. It is something we have to confront. Mystics, there is a beautiful Sufi story, a story from the Sufi tradition that many of you would have heard of Rabia, a very enlightened woman who wanted to awaken people in her village to the deeper wisdom and to the meaninglessness of the search that we are all on. So she one day came out of her house and it was dark. There was a street light, and people found her desperately searching for something under the street lamp. So they were puzzled. They all wanted to help her. And they came to her and said, "What is it that you're looking for, Rabia?" She said, "It doesn't matter what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that I have lost." So she said, "What is it?" She said, "I'm looking for a needle." Really? And everybody started looking for that needle under the street lamp. Time went by and people said, "Do you know where exactly you lost it?" She said, "Well, yeah, to tell you the truth, I lost it inside the house." They said, "Wait a minute. You say that you lost the needle inside the house, but here you are getting all of us to look for it outside the house under a street lamp." She said, yes, precisely, because there is no light inside the house. So I wouldn't find it. So I thought I might as well look for the lost needle where the light exists outside the house. This is a very famous Sufi parable of Rubia and has been interpreted in many ways. But one of the lessons that we want to awaken to from the story is the idea that because our senses are pointing outwards, most of us are searching outside ourselves to quench the deep thirst we have inside. We have a deep thirst for a meaningful life. We have a deep thirst for a sense of fulfillment. But rather than looking inward for that, here we are groping outside. And we're looking outside because the light seems to be outside. The story also builds on the metaphor that when you look inside, all you seem to find initially is darkness. And as Osho explains in his interpretation of the story, how many of you have had this example where you have been outside, perhaps in a very bright, sunny day in the street, and your eyes have adapted to that level of illumination? You suddenly come into the house, the whole of your house appears very dark inside, until your eyes begin to adapt, to the darkness inside. And if you stay inside the house in a little bit, all of a sudden the house begins to light up. You begin to able to see clearly. It is so, says Osho, even with our search. We are searching for things outside. We are blinded by the glittering temptations of the world outside. And we don't want to look inside. And when we look inside, all we see is darkness. But if we continue to keep looking inside, which means continuing to grow our self-awareness of our hidden patterns, of our quest, of this mysterious searching energy that each of us as human beings seems to be having, that we are constantly looking for something. And even when we find it, there's only a glimpse of satisfaction, which is very momentary. And soon the quest and the search again begins, because the value of anything that we have achieved is lost the moment we have achieved it. And this mindset and this untransformed state of consciousness of constantly searching always throws us away from the here now. The here now is a word that emphasizes the ability of our consciousness to be right here, fully present in this very moment and now. So it has both a time dimension and a spatial dimension to be here and now. But the propensity of human beings to be on this endless search for something nebulous that you don't even know what it is. It's almost like we are driving in the highway of life at 80 miles an hour, but we don't even know where we want to go. And this feverish search keeps us from finding real intimacy. And part of the reason why we are searching for something outside, says Osho, is because we are running from something inside. And there's a parable that he tells of a man who became very distressed by his own shadow. He was very disturbed by the sight of his own shadow, and he decided he wants to flee from his shadow. So he started running, but every time he lifted his foot, he noticed that the shadow also was in hot pursuit of him. So he ran and he ran and he ran, and ultimately dropped dead out of sheer exhaustion. What a beautiful parable to remind modern human beings of the dysfunctionality of their own feverish search. We have a shadow side inside us, and that shadow side metaphorically is all those things about us that we don't like, that we condemn, that we reject. And in different ways, we are trying to distract ourselves from that shadow. And in running from our own shadow, we are going to drop dead out of our exhaustion, says Osho. And it does not seem to occur to this man that there's a simple solution, that he just needs to stop running and settle under a shade. And if he were to do that, he would need to, his shadow would stop running after him and it would all be over. So it's for each of us to ask ourselves, what would be the equivalent of settling down under the shade for us and to stop running from our own shadow? And I put it to you that it would be a deep sense of self-acceptance of who we are, to be able to recapture and own those parts of us that we are unhappy with. In our quest for perfection, we are seeking perfection in ourselves. We reject ourselves and condemn ourselves for who we are. And we also seek perfection in others. Very soon, when you start a relationship, it's not uncommon for us to start demanding that kind of perfection from the other. And this inability to accept and embrace totality. Totality would mean embracing the light side of you and the dark shadow of you. Our inability to be at peace with the totality keeps us splintered. And here is where Osho talks about the controversial idea of, how we try to look up to ideals. We all try to live with ideals. We raise children to have ideals, but Osho brings up a disturbing fact about ideals. When you have an ideal, often what happens is an implicit rejection of the real. Because in our pursuit of the ideal, in our exaltation of the ideal, in a very subtle way, you have rejected what is real. And when you reject what is real, there is the risk that there is going to be a tremendous amount of self-condemnation. And therefore, we are endlessly in activity, and the activity could be physical, which would take us from one job to another or one relationship to another, moving along, or it could be ideational, like our mind is constantly running because if we remain unoccupied and we stay still, we will be thrown back upon ourselves, upon the reality of who we are. And if we are driven by ideals, we compare ourselves to this ideal and then we reject ourselves. And therefore, when we have these ideals, folks, take it with a grain of salt to understand that they can be problematic. Self-acceptance. It's only when we can accept ourselves and love ourselves unconditionally that there is a hope that we will be capable of accepting and loving another person unconditionally. Now, self-knowledge is possible only in deep aloneness. Often, to a great extent, we have a self-image. And that self-image of ourselves gets in the way of being able to relate to others. Because in our relationships, we try to preserve our self-image. If I have a self-image of myself as a kind person, I want to be reassured by my partner, by my wife, that I'm a kind person. If I receive discrepant feedback that I'm not a kind person, I might become hostile because my ego is threatened by the discrepant feedback. So be aware of the ways in which our self-image of ourselves can actually be a source of our blindness, our inability to see, to learn from feedback. But there's an even more peculiar and devious way in which our self-image causes us to fail. And I know many of you can relate to this. Sometimes our self-image is very harsh. We see ourselves as unlovable, often because of things that have happened in childhood where people condemned us, rejected us. We have a lot of self-hate inside. We don't truly love ourselves. And when another human being shows up loving us, a part of us becomes uneasy. We say, this is too good to be true. I don't deserve this. So there's a nagging suspicion in each one of us that we don't deserve to be loved because we are not good people. We are not lovable. And this idea of ourselves as unlovable that might have crystallized in childhood will lead us to sabotage our relationships. Because when somebody brings love to us, we will become uncomfortable. When somebody creates an experience for us and you're feeling happiness, you will immediately disturb that situation because sometime in your childhood, you decided you're not worthy of it. You're a mean person. You're a bad person. And there you keep becoming uncomfortable with the love that might be showered upon you. So one of the important pieces of housekeeping that we need to do, even before we begin a relationship or in a relationship, is to start watching and witnessing that voice of inner self-condemnation that is there within you, to be able to understand the self-hate and the self-rejection that meet there within us, because that self-rejection is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I reject myself, I'm going to relate to the other person in a way that they will reject me sooner or later. And then I can say, I proved a point. I was not worthy of real love. And we fall into that self fulfilling prophecy. So, this tendency to keep our self image intact is very strong. And that is where I want to open the gates to the Eastern approach, that a very important stance towards yourself is to embrace yourself as a mystery, to constantly remind yourself, I don't know who I am. Because if I constantly remind myself, I don't know who I am, there is a very good chance that I will allow for unpredictable and unexpected outcomes in my life. If I have a feeling, on the other hand, that I know who I am, the chances are that it's almost like I'm driving down the highway of life looking at a rearview mirror. I basically know who I am, and the outcomes that are possible for me within this box that I've created of this fixed self image are going to be highly restrictive and perhaps highly predictive and repetitive of earlier challenges that I might have had. So, to embrace yourself as a mystery is the first step, and that leads to the second corollary, to embrace the other as a mystery. Too often we realize, or we think we have realized, we know who the other person is. I want to share with you, in the context of my third divorce, that I was married to my wife for 11 and a half years, and we got divorced 2 years ago um, in February. After the divorce, I begged her to give me some feedback. I said, look, this is the third time I'm getting divorced. Surely there is a blind spot that I might carry, and that feedback might be important. So I asked a simple question. I want you all to flag this question, because this question holds a key for a potential transformation in all of our relationships. But it is something that I would encourage you to ask only if you feel you're strong enough for what you might hear. So I asked my then ex-wife, because I persuaded her after the divorce. We signed our divorce papers in Cleveland in the court. And then on our way home, I said, I need some feedback. And she was initially reluctant, but I persuaded her and we sat down. And I said, so what has it been like to be married to me for the last 11 and a half years? So what has it been like to have me be your husband for the 11 and a half years? That simple question opened a Pandora's box of unimaginable proportions and unimaginable intensity. She spoke for 4 days and 4 nights on what it had been like to be married for 11 and a half years. And I can share with you that it was a stunning discovery for me that I did not know who she was, even though I was married to her for 11 and a half years, which then it created an opening, because then she started asking me more about myself. And as I shared, she began to realize that she did not know who I was. Now, look at this existential tragedy of two people married to each other for 11 and a half years, and each of them has remained a stranger to the other. And for people who know me, you recognize that I'm not a very private person. It's not like I'm not disclosing a lot about myself. Often people leave the conversation saying TMI, too much information. You know, I often even share how many shits I take in a day with my close friends. And so I'm full of self-disclosure. And for those of you who are wondering how many he does, I have a word that describes it. It's called pentacrapic. Pentacrapic are people who poop 5 times a day. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm pentacrapic. Okay, so I disclose a lot, but yet we remain strangers to each other, because I want you to know that true intimacy does not come from sharing each other's chattering monkeys. Remember, we repeatedly talk about the concept of the chattering monkey, the voice in your head that is constantly talking to you. And every one of us has this voice in our head that is constantly talking to us. So it is not by sharing the chattering monkey that we can ever hope to really come to know each other. True intimacy is something much deeper. It's a connection that happens between two beings, not between two minds. It's possible for two minds to be connected, but for two souls, for two hearts, for two beings to be connected is an art form that is not related to the amount of time you spend in a relationship. How many of you had a fleeting exchange with somebody which lasted barely 10 minutes, but you felt a deep connection. And you might not feel that deep connection, no matter how, by spending 10 hours in a conversation, if all that you're sharing is information. So there is a very important aspect to the quality of the relating. Now, what I want to deal with a few of the practical issues in relationships. One of them is the first step we need to recognize is that often we are looking for a relationship when there's a sense of loneliness and emptiness that arises within us. So we're unhappy. We say, you know what? Let me get on Match.com. Let me get on Tinder. But notice that if what drove you to look for another relationship is an unhappiness, the chances are that out on Tinder and Match.com or whatever website you're looking at, you will also find similarly unhappy people who might be looking at the same time. They're looking for a relationship as a way of overcoming their unhappiness. So then you get into a catch-22, because if there are two miserable people who are hoping they'll find somebody who will relieve them of their misery, the chances are that they are not going to cancel out each other's misery. They will multiply each other's misery, right? So one of the catch-22s of relationships is this, says Osho. The first catch-22 is that the time when you're likely to be in a healthy, fulfilling relationship when you don't have a need to be in a relationship. When you have a need to be in a relationship, you're more likely to replicate the unconscious patterns of scarcity, and everything that goes with it. The second catch-22 of relationships, says Osho, is this. We all know, and we say this, right? Intellectually, we know this as a fact, that no other human being can make you happy. You know that, don't you? That happiness is something you find inside, and other human being cannot make us happy. Now, I might know that no human being can make me happy, but the reality is that when in a relationship, I somehow expect this other human being to make me happy. But that other poor human being is incapable of making me happy because they are not God, they are not some super person, they're just a human being. So they are not able to make me happy because it's a fundamental existential truth that no human being can make another human being happy. Then what happens? I'm disappointed that they did not make me happy. But my mind misinterprets the disappointment. Rather than merely say, you know what, I thought they would make me happy, but they did not make me unhappy, my mind infers, rather incorrectly, that they made me unhappy. And that is how we believe that people have made us unhappy. The reality is that other human beings can neither make you happy nor make you unhappy unless you've given them the power to do that to you. And we get caught in this conundrum, blaming the other person, and then there starts a chain reaction of retaliations, confusions, and all of the ways. One of the fundamental obstacles in the way of relating, and I want to draw attention to a cross-cultural distinction of relationships. Firstly, there is the concept of a relationship as something that happens between two people. That's more of the Western concept. There are two individual entities that remain solid and they build a bridge with each other and relate. In many Eastern mystical traditions, the goal of a relationship is to start off as two, but to move from duality to a sense of unity and oneness, where two people become one. So that's a slightly different cultural paradigm. The second one, which is more important, is to distinguish between relationship as something that happens between two people, love as something that happens between two people, like loving your wife or your child or somebody, versus love as a state of being. Now, when you realize love is a state of being, the rose has often been invoked. The rose releases a fragrance, right? The rose does not say, I will be fragrant to you and not to you. The love, the fragrance that the rose releases, the floral fragrance, is unconditional. It is just releasing it. Now, many of us know in our own lives, we know people who we recognize are very loving. For them, lovingness is a fragrance they're exuding. It is not conditional upon the other person. Too often we become stingy and constipated. We say, I will love the person who deserves my love. And then we make it conditional. The beautiful thing is when you see people in action who are who have attained to love as a state of being, for them, their lovingness is unconditional. It is not dependent upon the quality of the other person or the judgments that they might be making. But to get to that state of lovingness as a fragrance, you have to start loving yourself, accepting yourself, understanding the self hate and the sources of it that are there within you. And when we come to self acceptance, then we start radiating that self acceptance around us. The flower of love can only blossom when you give the other person freedom and you trust them unconditionally and accept them unconditionally. This is one of the greatest challenges. For most of us, our relationships are prisons. And what we try to do is we try to decorate those prisons a little bit, says Osho. We try to put a painting in the prison. We try to put a comfortable couch in that prison. We try to make that prison a little more bearable. Now, what would it look like to reinvent the relationship is to become unconditionally loving, to become unconditionally accepting. And here's a very challenging test for a relationship. Often relationships restrict our freedom. In one way or the other, they become prisons. Are you able to be with another human being around them in a way that they feel more free being around you than they would feel free being by themselves? Now, can you see what that might take? How can you be with another person in a way that your presence is adding to their freedom, not subtracting from their freedom? Now, when you accept people that way, their freedom, and you accept them unconditionally, the other person begins to feel a deep gratitude to you. Notice how few are the relationships in our life where we enjoy unconditional acceptance. Barely. There are people who are very compassionate around us. You start talking to them about your problems. In their well-meaning ways, they will give you advice. They will try to change you. They will try to fix you. But to be unconditionally accepted for who you are is the ultimate tribute, is the most loving thing. To be just, their compassion has reached such a state of flowering that it becomes synonymous with unconditional acceptance. And I would say that when we accept another person unconditionally, like at that level, a deep gratitude arises and they will start accepting you unconditionally. They will start supporting you in your ability to be free. And it results in a revolution of rising gratitude, a revolution of gratitude. You know, it's almost like a volley in a tennis match. It's a volley of gratitude. You send somebody, serve them unconditional acceptance, they will return unconditional acceptance with gratitude. And then you add another layer of gratitude and you serve them, respond with unconditional freedom, they will respond with unconditional freedom. It is an escalating revolution of rising gratitude, compassion, and expectations, and all of it has to be unconditional. So I would encourage you in all of your relationships to just listen. Listen to the other person unconditionally. Find out how much they might have struggled relating to you. Relating is a dynamic, flowing thing. A relationship, says Osho, is a fixed entity. It becomes an entity. Our challenge is to move from the mindset of being in a relationship to a space of relating, of embracing the other as a mystery every moment, of embracing yourself as a mystery every moment, of dying to the past and being in the here and now. Notice how many relationships are poisoned by the grudges that we carry. If we can just wipe the slate clean and show up every day like you don't know who this person is, who don't know who your partner is, and you embrace them, there will not be any of the baggage that you will bring from yesterday. Today, says Osho, is the seed from which tomorrow is born. And if you are present in the here and now today, pulsating with the magic of this moment, then all of a sudden, the tomorrow that is born out of this today will also carry with it the vibrancy and the refreshing luminousness of this moment. But too very often, our egos get in the way and our egos sabotage our relationships. We want to be right. We want to make the other person wrong. We want to dominate. We want to control. and we want the other person to live up to our expectations. Always remember that your partner was never a tailored suit designed to fit you, and you were not a tailored suit designed to fit your partner. It is the ability to embrace people as imperfections, as beautiful in their imperfection. Just like every leaf is unique, special, and extraordinary, every human being is unique, special, and extraordinary. And we can accept ourselves as unique, special, and extraordinary and celebrate that. We can celebrate the other as unique, special, and extraordinary and celebrate that. And every moment you're spending in the presence of the other is a gift. And if you think you know what it's like to be around this person, you have now been a prisoner of your own past. To be open to the mystery of everyday life. And I want to share with all of you 3 books that I found totally phenomenal. And if it is just amazing how much wisdom I gained from these books. One of them is called Being in Love. And it has a very catchy first chapter, Soulmates or Cellmates. It's fascinating, Soulmates or Cellmates. Being in Love. The next book that I would love to recommend is Osho, Intimacy by Osho. And the third one is Osho, Love, Freedom, and Aloneness. Osho, O-S-H-O is the author, Love, Freedom, and Aloneness, Intimacy, and Being in Love. I want to stop and formally declare the webinar closed for today. I have been thinking of making this a permanent 30-minute webinar every Sunday for the rest of my life. And I have been toying with the idea, and I'm wondering if this is going to be too much of a burden to be receiving emails from me and to be bothered in your news feed with ads. And if it isn't, I think I will make this a permanent community, a 30-minute webinar. Obviously you have busy lives, and I don't expect anybody to be present for the majority of them or all of them, but it's always there. But I would need your help. If you could overcome your inhibitions and talk to your friends and family and say, look, this is available. This is something that might give you a different perspective, because these are difficult times. And I think we can use all the help that we can, in acquiring perspectives of wisdom that will enable life to be a little lighter, for our relationships to be filled with a little more love. Yes, and the previous webinars that have been recorded, I will be creating a YouTube channel and posting all of them. So I hope to have a YouTube channel with all the 30-minute webinars, and to have an endless flow of webinars until my body or my mind give up. I would hope to have a 30-minute webinar every Sunday. Given the Browns games, I hate to take you away from them. We are looking at adjusting the timing. I will be sending out an email with the next 5 webinars. So my intention to announce 5 at a time with the new topics. What I would request you to do is to share widely with your family and friends. And also, if I don't have you on my email list, please send me an email to PSRIKANT, P3CANT, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, RIKAN as in Nancy, T as in Tom, at bw.edu, p3cant@bw.edu. Please send me an email and ask me to put your email on this permanent mailing list. And at any time you're sick and tired of me and want me to take you off the mailing list, I shall do so very promptly. So if I have a mailing list, it'll be easier. But if you have been receiving my emails, you don't need to do anything. It means that I already have your email, and I would be continuing to send you notifications. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your loving presence today and for the support that you've given me. It might be time for several of you to return to the Browns games. I'm going to pause and stay on the screen for just a few minutes in case there are any clarifications or questions that are sought. Otherwise, I will be ending the meeting, but for all practical purposes, you may leave now. Please don't feel pressured to stay. The webinar is formally closed. I will just be here to take any questions or clarifications that might come up. Thank you so much.
Hey, Pram, I have a couple of questions. Can I ask you?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so when you said we can only really get to know ourselves in silence, is there a possibility that we could then lie to ourselves?
Absolutely. But if we come to love ourselves unconditionally, then we become stronger in being able to face the bad news about us. When I had to listen to 4 days of feedback from my then ex spouse, we got remarried. I don't know if I told you that. When we discovered that we did not know each other after being married for 11 and a half years, we got remarried. It is possible for us to listen to feedback that might sound very harsh if we have accepted and loved ourselves and we are comfortable with being imperfect. If I can face what a terrible listener I am and how I don't listen and how narcissistic I am in seeking admiration and how I relate to people like it's always a Zoom webinar that I'm doing, and I'm always doing a Zoom webinar in my living room. If I can face all this harsh feedback and not take it personally and laugh at myself and have a sense of humor, the chances are that I will not find the need to lie to myself. I did a similar thing with my son when he was in middle school, high school, in the first year of high school that transformed my relationship. I said, son, what has it been like to have me as your father all these years? And he said, the biggest tragedy is that I was born to you as my father, as my son. You have been terrible. You have been Hitler, you've been Stalin, and you've been Mao to me. And then he spoke for 10 hours nonstop. And that conversation, I just listened and it reinvented the relationship. I want to draw the distinction between what is called the experiential truth and the factual truth. When people share with you their experience of be relating to you, you will often start logically arguing with them about the facts. Don't do that. If the facts don't matter in a relationship, what matters in a relationship is the experience of the person. If my son feels that I never listen to him, it's not about finding data to prove to him I listen to him. In fact, that will only prove to him that I don't listen to him at all. It is to be able to accept his experience that he has not ever felt listened to by his father. And that was the major breakthrough in our relationship, after which I have been to every Kendrick Lamar concert he has gone to, every Iron Maiden concert he has gone to, and I have taken him to the concerts by The Who and the Rolling Stones, and our relationship has become a matter of great celebration. But you have to face the facts, and you can only face the facts or the experience, not even call it the facts, if you love yourself unconditionally.
Okay, thanks. And just the one other really quick thing I wanted to say was that
Yes, please.
when you talked about really getting to know somebody, I know a while back the New York Times posted some article about all these questions that you should ask somebody, and if you ask these questions on a first date, you'll fall in love with them. Do you have any information about that or any thoughts on that?
Well, firstly, I would caution people against falling in thinking that they have fallen in love on the first date, because I would say that the test of love comes after the honeymoon period is over, when people really take off their masks and their cosmetics and show up to be the real people they are. Are we capable of loving the real person, right? But I would say that the questions don't matter if your being is not compassionate, is not a loving being. Because if I could show up with the questions, but if I am not a loving person, if I'm not a compassionate human being, I don't think those questions would help me, because, it's almost like, as they say, it's the same mind that has produced the Holocaust that can also produce a cure for cancer. It's not the tools that matter. It's the consciousness. It's not the content that matter. A loving consciousness can be completely silent on the first date and have an incredible experience. An unloving consciousness can have all the magical questions, and actually not be able to produce an experience of fulfillment and of being loved on the first date. So I would say it's the consciousness that matters, to know where we are coming from rather than what we are saying. In fact, Osho has said in his book, I think he said it in Intimacy by Osho, he said it beautifully, that language is a substitute. It's when you really learn to communicate, you don't need language. Silence gets the job done. It is when we don't have the ability to truly communicate at a very deep level that we are wallowing in an ocean of words.
I have two questions.
Yes, please.
This is Bridget. Hi. So
Hi,
my first
Bridget.
question, hi. So my first question was, you were talking about unity, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the difference between unity and enmeshment. That's my question number one.
It's a very powerful question. Firstly, I want to make it, I'm very grateful for the questions that are coming and for those who wish to stay, but I want to make it clear that each one of you understands that you can leave the webinar at this time and there is no pressure. I'm happy to stay, but I don't want you to feel like, oh my God, he said 30 minutes and he's going on and on, okay? Yeah, so it is a very beautiful question because whenever we talk about things like love, we are in the realm of the intangible. We are in the realm of non-verifiable, mystical, poetic landscape. I can check your temperature with a thermometer. I cannot check the nature of your lovingness. Whether it is love or whether it's enmeshment, I will not know. I have to rely on intuition. So sometimes we can kid ourselves. It is a great question, Bridget. There are people complimenting you on that. Sometimes we can say, you know what? I have moved beyond relationships of having two, and we have become one. And you might suffocate the other individual. It may be a relationship of enmeshment or dominance, where you're actually denigrating the dignity of the individual, silencing them, and fantasizing yourself to be in oneness when you're actually in two-ness. So it is very important that if you're not sure, it is better to maintain a relationship between two individuals. And that oneness is not something you can ever make happen. It is not a doing, it is a happening. When you have become full of love for yourself and full of compassion for people, a oneness will arise. And that oneness doesn't have to be with another individual. We have to first feel that oneness with the squirrels, with the trees, with the animals, to be able to see sacredness in life itself. When we can see ourselves, when we can see, as says Osho, that the blade of grass and the tall tree are actually one and equally beautiful and important, when we can see that we are rooted in existence, we are not really separate. When we are able to go inside ourselves and we don't see darkness, but we see a light. Just as we said, outside there is the bright sunlight, but when you go in, you see darkness. And Osho talks about a meditative lovingness as one, where you go inside and you still see light, but it's not the harsh light of the sun. It is the subtle bluish light of a full moon. When you can start feeling that coolness of a slight glow inside yourself, you have come to a place where you may start feeling a oneness with the whole of nature, with all of creation. And then you respect animals as sacred. There are mystics who have said that if you are somebody who is eating meat, you can never be capable of being loving, because when the animal, when he or she is being killed, is going to be exuding some chemicals, hormones, and is in a state of fear. And when you eat the animal, you're not just eating its body, you're also eating the terror and fear that the animal felt at that moment of dying. And so there are mystics who have said that it is almost impossible to come to that lovingness unless you start feeling that sense of oneness with all of creation. So, Bridget, I don't have a clear-cut answer to you. I can just, provide some different ideas. Clyde, you had your hand up, my friend.
Well,
did you have a question?
Param, let me compliment you on your sharing, and I'm very pleased to hear you're going to continue. And so I'm looking forward to more. I think today you gave some outstanding advice with just 2 words that I've practiced for a long time and found it works better than you think. And those 2 words are just listen. Most of us retort and explain why we did something wrong or how we could do it better, but just listen. And I learned that not from you, though.
Not
but
at
I'm
all.
glad you were advising it to others. Charlie Sheen, in an old comedy many years ago, had that advice, and he had many relationships that broke up and got together and whatever. And he told his brother, just listen, but do more than that. Reply by everything that's said to you after listening is, I understand. And so just listen and just understand, you'll get along with everybody. Great advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for reinforcing it. And I'm so grateful that these universal truths can come to us from many sources and from many different experiences we have. But the irony is that we sometimes even don't listen to the truths that come to us. So I love what you just said, Clyde, that you were able to listen to Charlie Sheen in that movie. And you practiced what you preached. You just listened. And it became such an important part of your inner architecture. Thank you so much. And I'm personally very grateful to you, Clyde, for your friendship and for your presence and support of these webinars. So grateful to you, my friend.
Thank you.
And I know that there are a few people said they have a few more questions. I will stay on the line and field them. But please, if you have to go, I would completely understand. As I understand, yes.
Hey, Param, this is just a follow-up from Clyde's point, and as you emphasize that listening, many a times we hear things, but we only listen what we want to listen.
Yes.
How do you create that filter that what needs to be listened versus what I want to listen?
Very beautiful. That is like an unanswerable question, Biman, and worthy of answer from the greatest mystics. But if you have some tips, we would love to hear your answer. How have you done that for yourself?
No, I'm still struggling on that. And many a times, like I dissociate or I try to dissociate things from myself and just try to do the analysis. But the point is, generally we react on the flow of things. So it's not easy for me to dissociate myself from the situation. Yes. And I still want to come back to the point what I want to listen. And sometimes I just insist my surrounding in some way or poking them or influencing them so that ultimately it comes out of their mouth what I would like to listen. So it's a very, very wrong approach. And I think it's actually at the nucleus of very many problems that we face in real societal life.
That's very profound. It is at the nucleus of so many problems. One of the things that has helped me, though, is that, we find it harder to listen when people appear to be angry at us, right? One of the things that I have found is when somebody is yelling at me or is angry with me, as or happens from time to time, I understand that the person is in fear. Anger and fear are two sides of the same coin. When somebody is yelling at you, you said or did something that brought up a lot of fear in them. And at that point, if you can translate the emotion as fear, it's easier to bring compassion. And when you bring compassion, it's easier to listen. So there are little ways in which I can do that. There was a time when I used to become very defensive about my teaching when students would criticize my teaching. And at that time, I used another trick upon myself. I saw the person who's standing before me as my own son or as my own daughter. And all of a sudden I said, wow, my son is probably in Syracuse University and he's probably giving feedback to some professor. And what would I want that professor to do at that time? And when I began to establish that relationship, I was able to go beyond the mind. And then my heart started beating with compassion for the young man or woman who was talking to me. So there are little devices that we can use to open our hearts, because too often, as Osho says in his Book of Secrets, which is a very beautiful book, it's as big as the Webster's Dictionary, but it's perhaps one of his most profound works I would recommend. It's called the Book of Secrets. He says there are two kinds of languages in life, the language of love and the language of logic. And modern society and the school has trained you to become expert at the language of logic. In fact, he says, in a university, there is a head of the department. Why don't they call that person heart of the department? Why not heart of the department? Why head of the department? So we have privileged the mind over the heart. And that has made it much harder for us to establish an experience of intimacy and connectedness with each other. And we relate to each other as objects, I-it relationships, as opposed to what Martin Buber, the existential theologian, says, I-thou relationships between two beings, between two subjects. So I think to be able to start encouraging the language of love, because in the language of love, it's not what you're saying that matters, it's how you're saying it. how you're saying it becomes more important.
Yeah, just an addition, the way we were trained, like basically through the STEM education field and all that, that our left side of the brain was more energized during our teaching learning process, whereas the right side, I guess that probably makes you a more complete man, was kind of subdued. And by way of energizing the left side so long and so intensely, probably we are very much ingrained and embedded in that logic part than the love part. And finally, when I this matured age, I realized that, well, I have to be partitioned between the love and logic and more towards the love. My life is almost over.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful.
Thank you. I'm a lifelong subscriber
words
to your talk and your channel from this point.
Very, very grateful to you, sir. And I just also want to say, I noticed even if these things are so easy to preach, but so difficult to practice, even while you were all making your beautiful points, I was listening with one ear, but with the other side of my head, I was composing, what will I finish saying? When Biman finishes, what do I say to Biman? What do I say to Clyde? Isn't it just amazing how easy it is to be listening? And Bernard Valdez has just put up that point, the difference between listening to just listen versus listening in order to be able to respond. A very different kind. And I think the kind of listening that Clyde was referring to was a very spiritual level of listening, where you're just listening to listen, not to compose a response.
I agree to that, Paral, and thanks for recognizing that. But because I suffer from the challenge that Biman is saying, since I've been hearing your talks, I have come to the revelation of listen to hear, not listen to reply. Because in our day-to-day, or at least in my day-to-day, I'm always ready to reply, and it's not always a positive reply, because it's more of it's a reply on an attack. So the art form of listening to hear versus the listening to reply is truly a challenge.
It is. And it's easy to theorize about it, but when you're in the moment, in the experience, sometimes all the wisdom leaves us, and the mind and the cunning mind takes over. And part of the challenge is in the world, in order to be successful in the so-called practical, harsh world, we train ourselves as Osho to have a cunning mind and a hard heart.
One of the things that I draw upon is your share in the Why Life Sucks series of waiting for Godot. And you have to, in order to exist, you have to truly understand yourself. So for the last 4 years that I've been hearing you speak, whether on campus at BW or now through the webinar, I found it, first find out who you are, be at peace with who you are, and then you can hopefully you can better relate to the outside world and whoever you interact with.
Very true, very true. Thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'll also continue to follow your webinar on your next set of 5 Sundays.
Appreciate it so much. Yeah. And this is a very committed and sincere and dedicated community of seekers. It's an honor of unprecedented proportion for me to be at least trying to serve you in some way. I'm not sure that I'm always able to serve you, but even to be that you give me the gift of your generous listening for the time that you do, I'm profoundly grateful to you. And I'm very sincerely moved and grateful to be surrounded by seekers with such sincerity and understanding.
I have a question that I'm not even sure exactly how to phrase it. So when you were talking, you were mentioning about how sometimes partners hold the other partner responsible for their happiness. And I've had that experience in partnership, and I look back on it and I try to puzzle out, if I'm in partnership with someone who is committed to holding me responsible for their happiness, not able to self-reflect or not willing to self-reflect or take ownership of their role, like, I'm really not sure what else I can do to make that work. What are your thoughts?
In the spiritual realm, Firstly, I would say that in any of your relationships, this is an amazing book, Intimacy by Osho. I would love for you all to read it and share your perspectives of what you thought. I have yet to come across a book about which I receive as many emails as I do about how transforming they have been. Intimacy by Osho, OSHO. As I said, he has over 2,000 books, but since we are on the subject of relationships, I would tend to think that spiritual work is such that you never try to change another person. You can only offer things to another person, and people come to awakening at different times in their own journey. So all you can do is to do the work on yourself. And when you do the work on yourself, often it happens that you will attract the kind of people who want to play at that level. One of the biggest challenges, though, is that from our own childhood histories, there are certain patterns that we have inherited that we play out in a relationship. For example, I had and I want to be careful about psychologizing. It is for each of us to just see what insights we can get from our past. I see the spiritual and psychological paths as able to borrow from each other, but they're also very different. Like, I know that I had an unfulfilling relationship in some aspects of my relationship with my mother, and I would unconsciously seek to replicate that experience, even with my wife. And even now, after being married to her again, I will slip into that slot. Well, suddenly I will come to the same hopelessness that I might have felt in childhood. There is no way that this woman is going to understand me. And we play out these patterns. And one of the very important things that, I think comes to us from Freudian psychoanalysis is the idea of transference. The idea that there are certain coping mechanisms and strategies and patterns and ways of relating that might have become frozen in childhood that we tend to reproduce and repeat in our relationships. So for me, there's an important marriage between some aspects of Western psychology and the Eastern wisdom traditions of mindfulness and meditation, where we start becoming aware. And when we start expanding the realm of awareness of our consciousness, we will also begin to see these hidden patterns that might be perpetuating themselves. And when we can see them, being able to have compassion for ourselves for having those patterns and for developing our awareness, the awareness causes them to slowly melt and disappear. There are many of the spiritual barriers in life. The only medicine needed is awareness, say the mystics. For example, your ego. I say I don't have an ego, but one of you can turn on your microphone and tell me all your Sunday webinars are the biggest waste of time, and you'll see me starting to defend myself. I'll tell you, why did you get on the webinar if you feel it's such a waste of time? You'll see a different side of me. In other words, my ego is waiting within me, right? When everything's going well, yeah, everything's nice. But when under threat, the ego jumps up. From somewhere it comes out. The antidote to the ego is not to try to conquer the ego, because can you hear what an egoistic thing it is to try to conquer my own ego? Because then I will become very egoistic about becoming a very humble person. The antidote to the ego, says Osho, is pure awareness, to be aware of my ego. And when I'm aware of my ego, Osho says it's like, how a small eyelash can fall into your eye and blind you completely. But if you take it out and you put it in your palm and you look at it, you will be surprised by what a small particle or strand of hair could have caused that level of blindness. So it is with your ego. When you can become vigilant and watchful yourself, seeing your ego, noticing your ego, laughing about it, not taking yourself too seriously. Be sincere, but not serious was Osho's message. Sincerity without seriousness. All of a sudden, the ego starts losing its hold on you. And then it starts dropping away. So I would say, Bridget, in a long-winded way, that awareness, there is nothing we can do. It is to feel grateful when we can see something. Even if I've yelled at somebody, I became very reactive and, and I'm fighting and I see it was my ego. I could criticize and condemn myself for having yelled at that person and gotten so hooked in that argument. Or I can say, you know what? I'm glad that now I could see the light of day and I can see that my ego was in charge. So feeling grateful for whatever small wins we have, for those little glimpses of understanding and awareness that we have. Whenever we can feel grateful, the discontentedness and the entitlement goes away. So we can feel grateful for a failed relationship. We can say, I know at a time when I had gotten divorced for the third time, I was feeling I want to get back with my wife. She was not sharing that same enthusiasm for coming back together. And I spoke to my friend Ratanjit Sonbi, and he gave me a piece of advice that helped me so much. He said, you can keep complaining and mourning about having lost Jessica, or you can go back and say, I'm grateful for the good times that we had. I'm grateful for the 11.5 years that we spent. And when you bring the frame and the spirit of gratitude, the whole of life becomes transformed. You're not living in the same world, you're living in a completely different world. And it is gratitude of a deep, unconditional nature. It is unconditional gratitude. It's easy to feel gratitude when everything is going well. It is when things are not going well to be in sync with that spirit of gratitude and not to do a spiritual bypass. A spiritual bypass is when you read a lot of spiritual books like I do and then start fooling myself, thinking that I've attained to some spiritual wisdom. No, that's just intellectual gymnastics. The mind can play all these intellectual gymnastics, and it can be very interesting to watch the circus. For example, I am quite fluent with words, and people who are on this webinar might think this man is wise. If you see the true state of my life and my being, no, my mind and my verbal fluency takes me far ahead of this where my heart and my being is. And people like me who are nimble, with their words and with intellect, have to be very conscious about this spiritual bypass. It is the state of the being that shows where I am in my spiritual journey, the state of my relationships. It is not the words that I use. You will find there are people who have written many books about love who don't know how to love. There are authorities on leadership at Harvard and Stanford, but they know nothing about leadership. They know about leadership, but they don't know leadership as a state of being. They don't know love as a state of being.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very grateful, very grateful.
Thanks, Param.
I know that.
Thanks.
Thank you. We've gone till 3 o'clock, and I hope everybody felt free to leave at any time. And this can happen again. I'll end the webinar and announce the conclusion and then just wait. Okay. So if you'd like to be on my mailing list, I put my email in the chat. Please do shoot me an email so that I can put it in the mailing list. So it is my promise that till my mind and my body allow, every Sunday I will be here, with a 30-minute webinar. Please share with your friends, and may the love shower upon you this holiday season boundlessly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I had a question. Will you send us via an email when you get all the sessions uploaded?
Yeah, when all the sessions are uploaded and the channel is alive and kicking, I will surely send out an email with a link to it. I would very much encourage your support, your curiosity, and your interest. Very grateful to you, Stephen, for that suggestion.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Pleasure to
Thank
be
you
here.
so much.
All the best.
Goodbye. Until
Thanks,
we see you
Rob.
next week. Yes, I think we have some good news with the Browns game, so go and enjoy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Param.
Thank you.